for the calendar today is House File 3413, Representative Holland's bill. Recommend that House File 3413 be placed on the general register.
Yes, Madam Chair, that is my recommendation.
All right, and I do see that you have the A2 amendment. First, would you like to move the A2 amendment?
Yes, Madam Chair, can I take a couple seconds to just explain it?
Yes, please, take your time.
Thank you. We have the A2 amendment, and I wanted to make sure that we brought this because we got some feedback from the Sheriff's Association about concerns that this would potentially impact other agreements that are between local law enforcement and federal agents. And we wanted to make sure that it was absolutely clear that this only impacted immigration enforcement agreements. We did have it reviewed by independent attorneys as well as our nonpartisan staff, who both said that they did not read the bill to be impacting anything other than immigration enforcement agreements. But just to be on the safe side, drafted this amendment that made sure there's comfort language.
All right, so Representative Hollins has moved the A2 amendment. Any discussion to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The A2 amendment is adopted. All right, and we will take up, there are other amendments, but we'll take up those amendments after we move through discussion of the bill and testimony. So Representative Hollins, your bill as amended is before us. Please tell us about it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair Novotny. Thank you, members. 287G agreements have dramatically increased since Trump started his second term. There are currently more than 8 times as many 287G agreements across the country than there were at the end of the Biden presidency. 287G agreements, for those who don't know, deputize local law enforcement, like your city police or county sheriffs, to partner with federal agents and do their jobs for them in the realm of immigration enforcement. I personally have 3 main concerns with the 287G agreements that are in place and that may come in the future. First, it incentivizes racial profiling and unlawful detainment. This is both immoral and illegal. Pulling people over, stopping them, and detaining them because of the color of their skin, what their last name is, or their accents is explicitly unlawful. Because 287G agreements provide monetary bonuses for officers to detain more people, law enforcement may be motivated by numbers and not about actually apprehending criminals as opposed to undocumented neighbors. Secondly, the illegal racial profiling leads to lawsuits. Many jurisdictions have been sued and have been forced to hand over millions of dollars, and those millions of dollars are generally paid by local taxpayers, so local residents. Instead of money going to schools or parks or road upkeep, Minnesotan tax dollars will go to paying lawsuit settlements that are caused because of these partnerships. And third, maybe most importantly, these agreements erode trust between public and local law enforcement. When local police are turned into immigration agents, communities stop seeing them as protectors, and instead they see them as deportation officers. This means that less crime gets reported, witnesses don't come forward when they see something illegal happen, and victims of domestic violence don't feel safe going to the police. All of this leads to less safe communities. We've talked a lot in this committee about not having law enforcement do things that they haven't been trained to do. We have noted that law enforcement aren't mental health professionals, they aren't social workers, and they're definitely not trained to interpret complex federal immigration statutes. I'll leave it there for now and turn it over to my testifiers.
All right, thank you. And I believe you have 2 testifiers. First is Noreen Shah, and then Hallie Pond. I see both coming to the table. And so I'm not sure who wants to go first, but whoever it is, just introduce yourself and begin your testimony. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representatives, my name is Noreen Shah, and I'm the Director of Immigration Policy for the National ACLU. I want to share with you 5 points today about this bill to limit local law enforcement from participating in the 287G program. The first is that we can disagree about immigration policy, but we can agree that ICE has lost public trust in recent months. And when local police enlist to work for ICE, which is what the 287G program is, that means local police lose that public trust as well. People don't want to call 911 if they think that ICE will show up at the doorstep. Abusers win when domestic violence and sex trafficking survivors are afraid to reach out and get the help that they need. The second thing, Minnesota law enforcement officers shouldn't have to follow the orders or be at the beck and call of federal officers when they are using face recognition apps to forcibly scan people's faces, when they're using excessive force, when they're racial profiling. We shouldn't put law enforcement officers of the state in that kind of confusing situation, a situation that can be a powder keg, that can be a recipe for legal violations. It's even more confusing when ICE is dangling a financial incentive, say, we're going to pay your salaries, we're going to offer you new phones and new cars, but you have to sign an agreement that says you will work at ICE's supervision and under ICE's direction. That is confusing for law enforcement officers who want to abide by the law, by state law, by their own police manuals. And that's not fair to put them in that situation. Third, if we talk about banning 287G, we're talking about creating statewide uniformity in the face of costly lawsuits that could cost municipalities millions and have in states and cities around the country. Local law enforcement might feel like they can rely on ICE's judgments about who to detain, who to hold. Unfortunately, we know that ICE's judgments in this regard are unreliable. Federal courts have found that with regard to detainers. And we know that people are being held unlawfully. Minnesota judges have found that. In fact, they found that ICE has violated more than 100 court orders requiring release. So we need that statewide uniformity so that law enforcement agencies don't feel like they are under pressure from ICE to join this program, to take ICE's word for it. Fourth, this bill, it's really important to remember, doesn't prevent ICE from operating in this state. It doesn't prevent ICE from knowing who's in local custody or knowing their release date. In that sense, it's a modest bill. Minnesota state law already requires that state officers immediately notify U.S. immigration officers when a detainee who appears to be a non-citizen is convicted of a felony or is, quote, mentally ill. In addition to that state law, it's common practice and has been for years that every time a person is booked into local custody, their fingerprints are sent to the FBI, which shares those fingerprints with DHS, which means DHS is notified of every person who is in local custody. And DHS has the ability, nothing is stopping ICE from having the ability and actually coming in and picking people up from a local facility. The last point is that by enacting this bill, you would be joining good company. Maryland and New Mexico just passed a similar bill in this legislative session. Delaware and Maine passed these bills in 2025. Oregon, Washington, California already have bills that go beyond this. New Jersey has the same prohibition via Attorney General directive. That's 8 states. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And the next testifier, please introduce yourself and begin.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello, fellow Minnesotans. My name is Hallie Pond. I'm a resident of Pine River, Minnesota, which is in Cass County. It's about 1,000 people big. And I'm the founder of True Space Consulting, which is a conflict resiliency practice. But today, I'm here as a neighbor, as a volunteer in the community, and as a believer in our shared constitutional rights. I'm here to ask you all to please vote yes on HF 3413. The 287G program erodes trust, it amplifies racial profiling, and it puts local communities at risk without our consent. Just weeks ago in Brainerd, federal ICE agents and local deputies entered a restaurant with 2 warrants and left with 4 people. That restaurant that was beloved, called El Potro, is now closed. The people taken worked here, they paid rent here, and they raised their kids here. They believed in the same American promise that we all share, that hard work, a commitment to a better, brighter future for our families and our children and their grandchildren, that this commitment will lead to opportunity and growth. When local sheriffs formalize agreements with ICE, they don't just assist federal enforcement, they become it. They stop people based on how they look, where they were born, or perhaps the sound of their name. That's not public safety, that's unconstitutional. And it makes all of us less safe. Because when people fear law enforcement, especially in small towns like mine, they stop calling 911. They stop reporting crimes. They stop showing up in our community. So make no mistake, these agreements don't just endanger public trust, they expose our counties to serious legal and financial risks. When counties formalize ICE partnerships through 287G, they risk holding people without probable cause. And when that happens, we've seen that counties get sued. And those lawsuits aren't just hypothetical. Counties in Arizona, Alabama, New York, Tennessee, and right here in Minnesota in Nobles County have been sued for millions of dollars. Those dollars come from local taxes, our tax dollars, which takes away from local schools, roads, and emergency services that are already severely lacking. And in Crow Wing County, we're not just talking about 287G agreements, we're talking about the intergovernmental service agreements to detain people for ICE, turning our local jail into a deportation pipeline, using local resources, local staff that are already understaffed, and local beds to advance a federal agenda. That's not accountability, that's mission creep with no public oversight. Everyday people like an Apple Valley mother of 3 have been detained in the Crow Wing County Jail for weeks without cause, separated from their children, only to be released by a federal judge for being wrongfully detained. That's an exorbitant loss of resources. This isn't justice, it's cruelty. HF 3413 draws a clear line. Our sheriffs should protect public safety, not enforce federal immigration policy. It ends these dangerous, costly, and optional agreements, which aren't required to collaborate with ICE. It protects due process, it protects families, and it protects democracy. So I stand with neighbors in Cass and Crow Wing counties and many others across this great state that we all are so lucky to call home. And I request you to please, please vote yes on HF 3413. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, and we will ask you to move off the table for a minute, but stay in the room, please, because we do have 3 members of the public who signed up to testify. First is Bruce Messelet, if you want to make your way to the table, and then Dr. Newman also signed up for this as well, so please make your way to the table. And Sherburne County Administrator Messelet, welcome to the committee. Please introduce yourself and begin your testimony.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Bruce Messelt, and I serve as the administrator for Sherburne County. I'm here to testify on behalf of the Sherburne County Board of Commissioners as well as our sheriff and law enforcement agencies. I would note that Sherburne County is not here to testify per se in favor or in opposition to the policy issues being discussed, but to point out the concerns and the practical implications we feel this legislation will have on several of Minnesota local units of government. In particular, I just want to highlight a few key points for the committee. First of all, House File 3413, as it reads and was introduced, is overly broad and would cast a very wide net on all law enforcement agreements with all federal agencies, not just relating to immigration. Now, I appreciate the amendment, but it doesn't go far enough. The 287G agreements, of which Sherburne County does not have one, falls under Section 1357. However, the bill also includes all, as was just noted, intergovernmental service agreements, which means anything that would touch any immigration issue would make those law enforcement agreements void under this bill. That is exceptionally problematic. Why is that? Well, we'll talk about Sherburne County. Since the 1990s, we have been providing high-quality public safety detention housing services for state, federal, other county, other states, and other counties in other states as part of our law enforcement functions. We do this in a highly professional, apolitical, and nonpartisan manner. This has been across multiple federal administrations, multiple Congresses, multiple state governors, and multiple state legislatures. We have done this service with changes in U.S. enforcement efforts and various immigration policies, interpretations, and practices. This is also done in collaboration with Minnesota governors, departments of corrections, commissioners, and the legislative bodies. We provide these services for such agencies as the United States Marshal Service, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, Immigration and Naturalization Services and U.S. Customs, now called ICE, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the state of Minnesota, and other counties, as well as other states. Third, we have invested decades of operating and capital resources and training and personnel to develop what is truly a best-in-class facility. What do I mean by that? In 2022, the Sherburne County Sheriff's Office achieved the prestigious Triple Crown status from the National Sheriff's Association. This was established and has been awarded to fewer than 100 law enforcement agencies nationwide, or less than 3% of those agencies. The designation signifies simultaneous accreditation in 3 key areas: law enforcement and dispatch services, jail operations, and medical care within those facilities. That's an amazing thing for the facility in Minnesota to be Triple Crown accredited. Fourth, while we ideally would all agree that we don't necessarily want or feel that we should need the services of county jails or indeed any law enforcement in our communities, we do have to face reality. And facilities like Sherburne counties and the other Minnesota facilities that have these inter-service agreements provide the best option for both our local law enforcement agencies, our state partners, and our federal partners when we have to deal with those who are detained or incarcerated. In fact, Sherburne County is the only accredited facility in Minnesota to assist with the United States Marshal Service. And sadly, we help detain some of the most dangerous and alleged violent criminals in Minnesota and the nation. We do this as their alleged crimes are investigated and the cases are prosecuted and their sentences are adjudicated. A loss of such facility
Mr.
would have a
Misselt, if
major
you-
impact.
Yeah,
Almost
excuse
done.
me. Yeah, we said 2 minutes and we're
Thank
over
you.
4, but I've
I'm so
allowed
sorry.
some. Yeah, if you could wrap it up, please.
I can
that would
wrap
be
it up,
great.
sure.
Thank you.
What we'd ask from the committee is this. We really need clarification as to the bill's implications if it's intended. If it's specific to 287G agreements, it should say so. If it's a broader net, then we need to deal with that impact. We also need to understand how the bill will impact the state as well as the counties, and look at the financial considerations the bill will have on these agencies. That's the type of things that I think this bill needs vetting before we see it go further. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Newman, welcome back. And because we're on a new bill, if you would please introduce yourself again and then begin your testimony on this bill. Thank you.
Sure. Chair Moeller, co-chairs, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Dr. Bibi Newman, and I'm speaking on behalf of the St. Anthony New Brighton Welcoming All Families Association, which is an immigrant-led interfaith civic organization engaged in local governance and community transparency in St. Anthony Village. We have submitted written testimony for the record, and I will summarize our position briefly. We support House File 3413. The bill draws an important structural line. It ensures that Minnesota's state and local governments do not enter formal agreements that authorize enforcement of federal civil immigration law, including agreements under 8 U.S.C. Section 1103 and Section 1357G. Federal immigration law remains supreme, but under long-standing constitutional principles, states are not required to administer federal civil regulatory programs. Minnesota may respect federal authority while declining formal deputization agreements. In our community, there is significant concern among families affected by federal immigration enforcement activity. When local departments state that they do not interfere in federal operations, residents often struggle to understand where local authority ends and federal authority begins. That uncertainty creates confusion, particularly in municipalities like ours that span multiple counties and transport detainees across jurisdictional lines. House File 3413 does not regulate federal enforcement itself, but it provides clarity and ensures that local governments are not formally embedded in federal civil immigration enforcement structures. Public safety depends on trust, and that trust depends on clearly defined institutional boundaries. For many families in our community, the bill represents an important safeguard, one that reinforces constitutional structure while preserving confidence in local public safety institutions. We respectfully urge your support. Thank you.
Thanks for your testimony. And next up, we have Sheriff Eric Tullison. Please make your way to the table. Welcome. Please introduce yourself for the record and begin.
Thank you, Chair Moeller, representatives. Eric Tollefson, I serve as the elected sheriff of Kansas County, and I'm also here representing the Minnesota Sheriff's Association. I'm here today to offer testimony in opposition to House File 3413. At the center of this issue is not politics, it's not ideology, it's about local governance. Kansas County, like every county in Minnesota, operates under a county-administered public safety framework. The sheriff is elected by the people, along with the county board, and together, we are accountable directly to our communities for operational decisions involving our jail, our staff, and our public safety responsibilities. House File 3413 would prohibit counties, sheriffs, and local units of government from entering into immigration enforcement agreements with the federal government. It would also require the immediate termination of any existing agreements. That is a significant shift away from local decision-making. Under current law, counties already have discretion. If a county board or sheriff determine that an agreement is not appropriate for that community, they do not have to enter into one. That authority exists today. HF 3413 implements a statewide mandate that eliminates this discretion. Discretion that I believe is essential to addressing public safety concerns at a local level. Counties differ, facilities differ, and community priorities differ. What may not be appropriate for one county may be manageable and operationally sound in another. A one-size-fits-all prohibition does not recognize those differences. In Kansas County, for example, we have over 25 years of experience operating under a federal detention agreement. We have built structured systems, trained staff, and established clear protocols during that time. My dedicated staff cares for roughly 100 detainees daily with compassion and dignity. Federal court appearances, religious observations, attorney meetings, recreational activities, mental health services, medical appointments, and dental care are all provided within the four walls of our jail. I think it's also important to understand that federal immigration enforcement is going to continue regardless if this bill passes. If local detention agreements were eliminated, individuals will not be released. They will simply be moved elsewhere, potentially to distant facilities or out of state. When that happens, detainees with local ties, family members, support systems, and legal counsel may be separated from those connections. Again, my point is this: local public safety decisions should remain local. Thanks.
Thank you for your testimony, and we did not have anybody else sign up to testify. So before we move into bill discussion, we will talk about the amendments, and I believe there is an A1 amendment. Who will be moving that amendment? Chair Novotny to the A1.
Thank you, Chair Moeller. As Administrator testified and is saying, I know Sherburne County has spent considerable money over the years doing improvements that are ongoing, and they're planning on doing a much more extensive renovation, almost a replacement from what I understand, that'll be at considerable cost. So we need to know if there's some protection. My question to you, Representative Hollins, is maybe I'm wrong or didn't hear you right, but do you believe that your original bill would affect holding facilities being able to hold and do, as Sherburne County does and several other counties do, that holds ICE detainees while they're awaiting their disposition?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you for the question, Chair Novotny, and thank you, Chair, sorry. So I think that is a good question, and I was actually just texting with my testifiers about this because I want more information on this. I certainly would like to work with places like Sherburne County to ensure that they are able to continue holding people that are legitimate, but I do think that there's an aspect of it that is criminal. So criminal enforcement, which is different than immigration enforcement, right? And so the question is, are they being arrested? Is it a judicial warrant that's being used, or is it a criminal warrant that is bringing them in? And I think there's a real difference there, right? I don't know if my testifier has anything to add to that, or if nonpartisan research could address it.
Well, we'll move first to Ms. Shaw because she came back to the table. So please.
Thank you. I do think that's an important distinction in our colleague's testimony from Sherburne County that, there's U.S. Marshal Service detention of people who are charged with criminal offenses. This bill has to do with immigration enforcement, civil immigration enforcement, so it would be distinct from, as I read this bill, it would not affect the ability of a jurisdiction to hold people for those criminal charges through an intergovernmental agreement, which is just a completely distinct circumstance.
Chair Novotny?
Could nonpartisan check in on this?
Mr. Diebel?
Madam Chair and members, the bill generically refers to the an agreement for enforcement of civil immigration law. I think that's not clear as to whether that includes the detention of someone pursuant to a civil immigration detainer.
Chair Novotny?
So we don't know. Well, in that case, I'll offer the amendment, and the amendment is just that if a government agency gets considerable cost due to the cancellation of the contracts, until we can get a little bit better resolution on what this bill means, I'll offer this and just ask for a yes vote.
All right, and before we do that, we have to get to the A3 amendment to the A1 amendment. Representative Hollins, are you offering the A3?
Yes, Madam Chair.
So please explain the A3 amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chair Novotny. The A3 amendment would be saying that we would not be paying for the authorizing, or we would not be authorizing a reimbursement under subdivision 4 or 5 unless the federal government reimburses the state of Minnesota for the economic impact of Operation Metro Surge. I don't know how much people recognize or understand how devastated our communities in the Twin Cities were by Operation Metro Surge. Businesses were closed, people were laid off, they couldn't pay their rents, and not just immigrants, but like places where immigrants go to eat or shop. They had to cut their hours, and people were desperately impacted by it. There was one study that came out of that we got from northstarpolicy.org, and they say conservatively an estimated $106 million in lost wages just in Minneapolis. This has had a huge economic impact on the metro, and not just Minneapolis and St. Paul. So this amendment would be asking for a study to be done and compensation from the federal government for the devastating economic impacts that's had on the metro area before we would compensate the counties that have lost money from their 287G contracts being canceled.
Any discussion to the A3 amendment to the A1? Just to the A3. Chair Novotny?
We're discussing a bill on federal contacts. I believe that the amendment's a little out of the realm of the bill, and I recommend a no vote.
Any further discussion on the A3 amendment? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the A3 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The amendment is not adopted. Now we will go to the A1 amendment. Discussion on the A1 amendment. Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The A1 amendment, I understand the concerns that Chair Novotny has brought forward. I would still recommend a no vote, given that these are contracts that that counties have willingly gone into. This is part of the concern that we have with these contracts, is that they are depending on the income that's coming from the federal government, which is in fact not guaranteed any longer than this administration. And I think there's a real concern about taking federal funds to pay for salaries, bonuses, and equipment when that money is destined to go away and is predicated on bounty hunting our undocumented neighbors. So I would recommend a no vote.
All right. Any further discussion? Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I guess I just have sort of a question of how this would work. given what we have seen happen, and I think we'll get to the underlying piece of the bill about the liabilities that some of these agreements will take in terms of treatment. But one of the things that we know has happened since Operation Metro Surge is that citizens have been detained and released, and folks with legal status have been detained and released. I'm wondering how the compensation that that local jurisdictions are getting for immigrants that are undocumented, unlawful immigrant folks who are there under some color of law, if that differs at all, or if it's the same for the citizens and the folks who have been unlawfully detained, what the compensation looks like that the counties are getting.
So I'm not sure who your question is directed to.
It may be directed to the sheriff.
Oh, go ahead, Sheriff.
Chair Moeller, I'm not familiar with if the Candioi sheriff is housing,
Is what?
if he's housing anyone.
Oh,
If we're asking a question about housing costs, we might.
go ahead, Sheriff. Answer that question first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, we do have a longstanding housing agreement. However, I'm not clear what the question is.
Go ahead, Representative Freeman.
Thank you. The compensation you're getting from the federal government for housing folks, is it dependent on whether they are citizens, whether they are charged? How is that differ? Does that differ based on the status of how they end up there and whether they're charged by the federal government?
Sheriff.
Madam Chair, Representatives, so the compensation is just based on a daily bed rate, just like we're a boarding facility, just like we would board for another county. It doesn't have anything to do with where they are in their immigration proceedings.
Representative Freeman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, that is concerning because it feels like it could create an incentive structure to continue if you are paid, whether or not they are lawfully end up in your detention, and for as long as they're being detained, it feels like it could create reverse incentives. It also feels like it cuts against, and as we think about the compensation piece, when that happens, I think that the local jurisdictions take on real liability, and I think we'll hear more about that in the underlying bill. But both this amendment seems to actually accentuate the reason that this bill is so important, is that we don't want to create liability for our local jurisdictions to be detaining, unlawfully detaining, and part of violating the rights of citizens, and then potentially be on the hook for, when they do it, those taxpayers in those local jurisdictions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Further discussion to the amendment? Any closing comments? Chair Novotny, you shaking your head no.
Oh, yes.
All right. All those in favor of the A1 amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? No. The A1 amendment is not adopted. Next, we'll move on to member discussion, and we do have a few members on the list so far. So Representative Curran.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much, Representative Hollins. Like a lot of ideas that I've seen, I see this as a really forward-thinking, smart proposal that you have in front of us. And I say that because the core of what this is getting at is local peace officers, local enforcement has worked so hard to get to know people and become trusted. And what I've seen in my community, even throughout Operation Metro Surge, regardless of where you land politically on that operation, what I've seen is that my local department's primary concern is with the increased federal activity is that their own residents locally will fear calling police because they're associating our police officers with federal agents, which in the general public is completely understandable. Law enforcement is law enforcement. You sort of have this general expectation of what law enforcement does and what they don't do and how they should treat you and how they shouldn't treat you. And whether or not, we read legal distinctions, whether or not we say, certain officers can act unconstitutionally and some can't, that conversation doesn't matter. What matters is on the ground in the relationships that people have and how they're treated throughout any sort of civil or law type cases. And I want to talk about the practical implications on local government. that were mentioned, there's a lot of defense on what local government should be able to do, what local government should be able to enforce, what local government should be able to enter in a contract for. And look, local government's responsible to take care of their locals. Entering a federal contract immediately steps outside of what the purpose is, to care for your own, care for your people. And so, you know, I hear that there's a concern that if we don't allow for people to go to, you know, certain facilities, that they're going to be sent somewhere else. Well, I have news for folks. If you're afraid that they're going to be separated from their families by going to a different facility, they were separated from their families when they got to yours. There's no difference there. And calling one facility that does such practices best in class, I'm gonna be honest with you, in this committee, is a weird flex. That is a weird flex on this topic. Because what I'm hearing is, it's been done for a long time, or this bill doesn't do anything anyway. And you think you do it well, and you make money. Well, guess what? It doesn't make it helpful for public trust with local officers, and it doesn't make it right. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care that you think you do the wrong thing well. And I don't care if you think your detention facility that keeps people separated from their families deserves some kind of Yelp review in a committee. I don't have any questions. I just really, really appreciate your attention to this detail. And again, this is very forward-thinking in maintaining trust with local officers who are funded locally, who are meant to protect our constituents. Thank you.
Representative Duran.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Hollins, do you trust your local law enforcement?
I do.
Representative Hollins.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Yes, Representative Duran, I do. I've worked on developing a better relationship with them.
Representative Duran.
Do you think that maybe a little bit of cooperation would actually help actually keep your community safe if we have our local law enforcement that you trust actually influencing the other people coming into your community? Do you believe that that would actually change the way that we're looking at things? Because when you have local law enforcement that you trust actually coming into agreement with actually people that are not from your community to say, like, this is how our community is, so we can actually make some foundations to do this professionally, as safe as we possibly can. But not only that, to bring the community closer in regards to they have a job to do, we're gonna do it safely, and we're gonna do it by the support of our local law enforcement with the collaboration of everybody to make sure we're doing this safe. Do you feel that a collaboration would be better or worse? And obviously, it says that it's worse because, you know, you're just gonna have people operating that are not from your community, that are not from your area, that understand your community, that are just going in there and just doing whatever they want to do and then getting out, instead of actually teaming up with your local law enforcement that understands everybody inside there, that understands the complexity of the dynamics of the culture and everything else that are going on with inside some communities. So wouldn't you feel that that would be better?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Duran. I'm really glad you asked this question because I wanted to take a second I'm looking at this side of the room and I'm like, there's so many police officers here. And you all are working in your community to build trust with the people that you represent, right? And you took time and you trained and you learned how to do these things and you like ramped up slowly to be able to represent your community and to know how to do your job. These federal agents did not. They got 42 days of training. Representative Duran, I bet you got more than 42 days of training, right? I bet you've been in your community, that you talk to people, that you know them and you recognize them. I bet you say good morning and you stop at the same bakery to get coffee when you have the chance, right? Like, you know your community. You trained for this job. I don't think any of you should compare yourself to these federal agents. Not Representative Whitty, not Representative Steer, not Chair Novotny, not you, Representative Duran, not you, not the sheriffs, not the police chiefs. You all work hard. You know the people in your community. You know how your community functions. Don't compare yourself to these federal agents because they don't know anything. They are not good at what they do. They are picking up people who are US citizens and detaining them. I don't want to see, y'all deserve better. And Lord knows, I have had my struggles with law enforcement. I have worked to repair those relationships with my police chief, with my sheriff, with the rank and file members that are in my neighborhood. It has not always been easy. But seeing this Operation Metro Surge has opened my eyes to how much better our local law enforcement is than these federal agents. They do not show respect. They do not show care. I'll tell you what, I do trust my local law enforcement because if I followed them in a car, they would pull over and they would say, is something wrong? Is there a problem? Do you need something? Are you in trouble? They wouldn't pepper spray me. They wouldn't tear gas me. They wouldn't try to break my window and yank me out of my car, right? Trust is a two-way street. I trust them because they have shown me respect. And I don't believe that these people who come in, who have extremely limited training, I mean, I saw an ICE agent wearing Keds one day, like those little white shoes that, like, you know, kids wear. They're not prepared for what they're doing. At a raid, she was wearing them. They're not prepared. They don't know what they're doing. They have not been trained well. And I think you all should not compare yourselves to them at all. And I don't think that there's anything that you can do to make them act better than what they're doing. And part of the reason is because they don't have the training and they don't have the discipline. And I think, I'm sorry, I'm trying to say this with love because I think you all deserve better than to compare yourselves to these federal agents.
Representative Duran.
I wouldn't necessarily say we're comparing ourselves, but what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to say that the people that you trust could influence the actions of the people that you don't, okay? So if we're working hand in hand with people that you trust inside your community, that might actually kind of bleed off into the person that you maybe not trust. If there was a little bit more cooperation from the start, from all this stuff from the start, I guarantee you this would be a complete different picture. From the start, from the very start, if we had cooperation, this would be a completely different situation. You wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't be talking about this. What we would have done is we would have slowed everything down. It'd be a little bit more targeted approach to what we're doing. Now it's like these guys are coming in, they're hitting it and leaving. They don't, you know, like they think they have who they got. But whenever you go out there, you're going to be protested by 20, 30 people like that because it's organized. So what I'm saying right now is that I think we as legislators need to take just a step back and kind of look at this as a whole and say a little bit more cooperation between everybody is going to do a lot better. We just had a bill that we heard that we want the BCA to cooperate the law enforcement or the federal government to get a better understanding for more transparency. And now we're having a bill that says, screw the federal government, we're not going to cooperate at all. So it's just it's strange to me how we're kind of battling right now, and we're putting police officers in the middle of this. And again, we're playing ping pong with law enforcement officers, the people that you trust to go out there and protect your community. It's going to be very hard to build these relationships that we need to move forward when we have legislation like this. We just need to take a step back, calm the nerves, and cooperate.
Can I respond?
Go ahead, Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Representative Duran, what I'm hearing is that we should just comply with the federal government.
No.
Well, you're saying we need to calm down and just do what they say and cooperate. And that does not, maybe I'm taking it out of context, maybe I'm not understanding, but that doesn't seem, that doesn't seem like the message of the GOP. first of all. But second of all, that doesn't, I don't believe that it's gonna work that way. I really don't. I mean, your theory is theoretical, mine is theoretical as well, because we haven't seen either of these two things play out, right? There is still cooperation to some extent by law enforcement even in sanctuary cities, right? We know this. So for us to say that if everybody had just complied, that it would be better, I cannot believe is true. And what I know for sure is that people in my city at the very least, would stop contacting their local law enforcement for everything else that they see. Everything else that they witness, everything that they hear, they would not want to talk to their local law enforcement if we were forced to comply. Because they're afraid. And I can't explain it to you any better than that. Like, I'm coming at this from my heart and not from my brain. I am talking to people on the streets, and they are telling me they are scared. So I made Representative Bliss laugh so much.
All right, we're gonna keep moving here. We've got several members on the list. Representative Ingen. I'm not on the list. Oh, you're not on the list? Okay. Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't remember what I even had. I guess just a reminder, and this is going back to the last bill. You know, we can influence what happens. Maybe I'll there's a comment from Chair Novotny in response to the prior bill saying, look, there's nothing that we can do to influence the federal government. If that bill had passed, it wouldn't have affected the federal government in their actions. We can't force them to cooperate. And I guess I'd point out that that's not true in the sense that if our GOP colleagues were to call out the conduct of the federal government, were to say, federal government, we need you to cooperate when a federal agent kills an American citizen, there needs to be investigation as to whether that is justified or not. We should all agree on that. And we as Republican office holders are going to call that out as much as our DFL colleagues, because we all have an interest in protecting rights. We all have an interest in following the Constitution. We can influence what happens. There's the statutes that are passed, and there's the actions that we take. Turning to this bill, we can influence the rhetoric that we use, the actions we take can influence. I'm certainly hearing that from my colleagues talking about the rhetoric that you're hearing. The rhetoric that you're hearing is us saying that our rights need to be protected, our Constitution needs to be followed, and everybody in our society has those rights. And that's what we're saying. We're calling for those rights to be respected, and it's just as simple as that. And it is not the case that there was some lack of cooperation initially. Everything that I'd heard was that before the surge, everything was working perfectly fine. Our different local governments were collaborating with the federal government to the extent provided by law. And what we saw is the federal government then comes in and takes the steps that you all have been hearing about for the last couple of weeks. And that, believe us, this is things that are from our neighbors experiencing this. Just people who are not interested in politics, just trying to go about their lives, live their lives, and stand up for their neighbors' rights as well. That is what's happening. And the alternative that we do here is that we just kind of roll over and just tell the federal government, sure, violate our rights. We won't do anything. We won't look into it. We won't investigate it in any way. We're just going to kind of say, we hope that at some point you'll decide to stop investing in our rights. That is not acceptable, and that should not be acceptable to any of us looking back to our first principles as conservatives, as progressives. Should not be acceptable at all. What this bill is saying, look, we are going to take care of the safety of the people in our state and the rights of the people in our state. Federal government's going to do what it's going to do, and that's going to be fine. We're going to have that relationship. That has worked very well in our communities, and there's no reason that that should not be happening around the state, because the alternative has been really, really dangerous and violative of our rights. And to an extent, but remember, not only 2 people being killed, but a 3rd person being shot and having that situation be lied about under oath. Under oath. So even the 3rd person who got shot, unfortunately was not killed, it turns out, was a complete falsehood from the federal government and admitted to by the federal government. Representative Hollins, thank you for bringing this forward. And I really would encourage all of us to remember that we can influence what happens with the federal government, but the actions that we take. This is time for all of us on both sides to stand up. Thank you, Representative Hollins.
Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I sort of want to get back to this question of the cost of cooperation. And maybe this is a question for your testifier, Ms. Shaw. I think that there's been some maybe agreement, at least maybe not in this room, but broadly that there has been illegal, unconstitutional tactics that we've seen federal agents do. And because we have a bill on it, it's my understanding that that if that happens to you, you can't sue federal agents. I'm wondering what who's holding the bag for when that kind of behavior happens, and I'm wondering how that'll affect our local jurisdictions.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you for the question, Representative. Local taxpayers are on the hook for these civil rights violations and the costly lawsuits, and that is clear from years and years of lawsuits and settlements. And just to name a few, in New York City, had to pay in a class action lawsuit $92.5 million. Los Angeles agreed to a $14 million settlement for conduct by its sheriff's department. These are for honoring ICE detainers. Smaller sums in New Mexico paying $350,000, San Juan County in that state, $190,000 in San Francisco. I could go on and on. These are big numbers. This is in the context of illegal detention, holding people when you shouldn't have because they were citizens or they had status and they shouldn't have been held. Something more is happening here in Minnesota. Many, I believe it's 5 counties and police departments have recently signed on to a version of the program called the task force model. The task force model comes out of the jail and puts you into the street doing ICE's bidding. And when we're talking about ICE, that is operating using facial recognition technology to force people to submit their most intimate information. We're talking about racial profiling, excessive use of force. That potential for lawsuits is higher than we've ever seen for municipalities that work with ICE. We do know a little bit about what things could look like, though. Your state is new to the task force model of the program. There are other states that are less so. We published a report just a few days ago called Deputized for Disaster. In that report, we document about how this program is playing out in states around the country. One of the states is Florida, where you've got a number of counties, actually every county in the state is part of the 287G program. You'd think perhaps that by welcoming in ICE, that would mean that communities were safer because of that cooperation some of the other representatives were talking about. In fact, people are afraid to go to the grocery store, afraid to go down the highway, because through the task force model, ICE and Florida Highway Patrol and local law enforcement have set up checkpoints. You can't even go into the Florida Keys without entering an immigration checkpoint. Other states around the country where you cannot exit off of the highway without being put through an immigration checkpoint. People can't go to a concert without having their papers checked for their immigration status. That is what the task force model of this program brings to a state. It does not bring safety. It does not bring community trust. It brings more and more community fear, which means kids don't go to school, people don't go to the hospital. I don't have to tell you, you've been living that with regard to ICE and Border Patrol, and people around the country are increasingly living that with regard to their own law enforcement agencies that are sworn to protect and serve them. They're afraid of them, just as so many people here have been living in fear of ICE.
All right, just very briefly, because we have to move on. Representative Greenman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think you make the case that when we talk about cooperation, we should be cooperating with the law, the Constitution, and our rights, and not federal agents who have shown that will throw those all out the window. And when we talk about being morally on the hook in Minnesota, and particularly if we allow these kinds of agreements, we're morally on the hook for the civil rights and constitutional violations, but it also sounds like taxpayers are on the hook for the brutal violations of federal agents. Neither of these things are acceptable in Minnesota. With that, Madam Chair, I'd like a roll call.
Okay, very well. Roll call's been requested, and I'll just make a quick comment as well. Based on the letters in our packet, I was very disappointed to see the Association of Minnesota Counties and the League of Minnesota Cities response to this, especially in light of the cost that were just described and the cost for Operation Metro Surge. I know that the cities, and I don't believe the county I represent, are reflected in this letter that we received from them. Vice Chair Feist.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also had some comments about the League of Minnesota Cities letter, but to take a step back, statewide uniformity is important. We've had good conversations about like one size fits all does not always, it's not always the best approach, but I think it's particularly important on this issue. I was thinking about T and U visas, which are for victims of serious crimes and victims of trafficking. They were created in order to encourage immigrants who are victims to turn to their local and state law enforcement for help so that we could investigate crime and catch the perpetrators. And we need to know that victims aren't going to question whether or not they can reach out for help if they happen to be in Sherburne County or Crow Wing County or Hennepin County. You know, they're not going to be like up on the latest 287G agreements. So I do think that this is one of those scenarios where a statewide approach is actually really important. I also wanted to kind of highlight how 287G agreements work. Like, we're asking law enforcement who are not trained in immigration to then help enforce immigration law. And I wanted to briefly just share a story. Arizona had a state law that was like the show your papers law. And at that time, I was working with a client who was a physician. She was here legally, but she was in this 30-day grace period at the end of her status, and she was like transitioning to a residency, and so she had a pending change of status, but it wasn't approved, and so like, and she had an expired visa. So like, if you looked at all of her documents, like you would be like, whoa, she must not be here legally. And she was like moving to like Maricopa County, and I was like, ooh. And at the same time, I had a client who was a white Canadian dude who was totally here without status. And he and I were talking, and he's like, I could go to Arizona, I'd be fine, wouldn't I? And I'm like, yeah, probably would be. So like, immigration law is incredibly complicated. You know, a visa does not prove status, and you know, it's just like super complicated. So we want law enforcement who are experts in protecting victims and investigating and solving crime. We want them to focus on the things that they are skilled and trained to do. And in theory, we should have immigration officers who are skilled and trained in what they do. That doesn't always seem to be the case, but that division is actually really important. And I did want to comment on the League of Minnesota Cities letter, because they use the exact same language in the final paragraph as they did when they opposed a bill that was kind of the opposite of this bill. And I just wanted to read from their letter and a couple of other letters submitted by trusted stakeholders on this and other legislation that's related. The League of Minnesota Cities wrote, "Local law enforcement agencies statewide depend upon trust-based relationships within immigrant communities to solve crimes and implement community policing strategies that promote public safety." That sure sounds like a good argument for this bill. I also wanted to cite to a letter that the County Attorneys Association wrote on a different bill, related topic. They wrote, "Local participation in federal immigration enforcement undermines public safety by deterring members of immigrant communities from reporting crimes and participating in the prosecution of those crimes due to their fear of immigration consequences." And lastly, I just wanted to cite to the International Association of Chiefs of Police. When they have been asked to weigh in on legislation like this or the opposite of this, they have said, quote, "State and local law enforcement should not be involved in the enforcement of civil immigration laws, since such involvement would likely have a chilling effect on both legal and illegal aliens reporting criminal activity or assisting police in criminal investigations." And so, you know, I think that those are some trusted messengers, and I think we should listen to them, and I think we should pass this bill. Thank you.
Chair Novotny.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. I will actually limit my questions and statements to the bill at hand. Commissioner Snell, if you wouldn't mind stepping up to the testifying table quick. I can leave. Commissioner Snell, I'll let you go through that.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Snell, state your name after I answer the question. How many incarcerated persons are in the DOC system right now that have immigration hold detainers on them?
Commissioner Schnell, and I'll just preface this by saying that you were not ever signed up for this particular bill, but if you can answer those questions, that would be great.
Madam Chair, Representative Chair Novotny, Paul Schnell, Commissioner Corrections, there is approximately 380 people in DOC custody that are non-U.S. citizens. about 270 or so are subject to ICE detainers.
Thank you, Commissioner
Chair,
Snell.
Chair Novotny.
Thank you. Sorry, Chair Moeller. Commissioner Snell, of all these people that are in your facilities, are they separated from their families?
Commissioner Schnell.
Madam Chair, Chair Novotny, yes.
Chair Novotny.
Commissioner Snell, are the rest of the people that are in the facilities and all other facilities in the state that you either control or the county jails that you inspect, are they separated from their families?
Commissioner Schnell.
Madam Chair, Chair Novotny, yes.
Chair Novotny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Commissioner Snell, your agency inspects the county jails, and one of the jails you inspect is the Sherburne County Jail. Has there ever been a fail of the ICE holding facilities at the Sherburne County Jail?
Commissioner Schnell.
Madam Chair and Chair Novotny, the answer is no.
Thank you, Commissioner Snell. Representative Hollins, my question for you is where? Where will these people on detainers be held that you would prefer that they be held? I hear I see all the stuff going on at the Wiffle Building that I know admittedly little or nothing about, but where would you want them held? We've got the people that Commissioner Snell has testified to that have ICE detainers. Some of them, from testimonies that we had in last session, you might be familiar with, have committed horrendous crimes, murders. Sherburne County ICE facility was holding Zacharias Masari, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, one of the September 11th participants, before we even knew who he was or what was the plan. So where would you prefer that these people be held? You don't want them at the Whipple Building. You don't want them at local facilities that are controlled and inspected. Where would you like them held?
Representative Hollins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I think you're conflating the civil immigration aspects with the criminal aspects, but also I will defer to my testifier, who I think has a more thorough answer.
Ms. Shaw.
Thank you, Chairman. I think there are two separate issues here. So one is the question of people held on ICE detainers, which are requests that a local law enforcement agency notify them if and when they're releasing the individual. And second, that detainer request says, can you hold on to the person for an additional 48 hours beyond when they would be released? So in the Department of Corrections context, if you've got an individual who has been serving a sentence, ICE is placing a detainer, asking for notification about that person's release. This bill does not prevent the Department of Corrections from providing that notification. In fact, Minnesota law already requires that, in fact, they do provide that notification with regard to an individual who is a non-citizen who committed a felony. So that's the detainer issue. With regard to the detention issue, so we're talking about civil immigration detention contracts, which are usually intergovernmental service agreements between some kind of municipal entity and ICE. And the question is, if you weren't I think your question, sir, is if you weren't holding people in one of, I think, 4 or 5 different local jails in the state that have those intergovernmental service agreements, where would they be held? So I think part of the answer to that, we can look to other states that likewise have banned these intergovernmental service agreements. And what we know from the experience of other states is that there's a concept that's, if you build it, they will come, right? If you build a jail, we'll fill the jail. And if you stop having those jail beds empty, you won't be enforcing against so many people. The other part of this is that if you are bringing those people into your local jail, they don't stay in that local jail. And if you look at the statistics for the Minnesota County jails, people are average length of time in a Minnesota County jail before you move on to another ICE detention facility, maybe 10 days, 12 days in some circumstances. So what's happening is that people are being put into a pipeline. They start in your local jail. They end up in ICE detention, which is deadly. 9 people have died just in this year alone. We all know this. Kids like Liam didn't stay in a Minnesota County jail. They were funneled into a detention facility for families in Texas, where there are reports of horrific conditions. So there's a moral principle here of our local taxpayer dollars and local taxpayer-funded facilities going to help funnel people into deadly facilities in places like Texas and Louisiana. And then I think there's also just a empirical matter of if you close these facilities, would enforcement go down? And that has been the experience of other states that have had these bills. And of course, you wouldn't be alone in passing a bill like this. There are other states, I think the most close one nearby is Illinois, that have passed these laws.
Chair Novotny?
Thank you, Chair Moeller. I guess I'm not going to, I'm going to recommend a no vote on this, but I'd just like to say one thing. And our side of the aisle sits, and for the most part, we take it. Representative Pinto, I'm deeply offended by your implication that we haven't done anything, because you don't know. I will tell you that many members on this side of the aisle have made comments. We have talked. We have set up liaisons. We have tried to talk and set up communications between the federal and the local governments. We have tried that. We don't do it publicly. We do it backdoor. We try to be quiet and get something actually done. I'm not out looking for publicity. I'm not out looking for a clip to put on social media. With that, I recommend a no vote.
Closing remarks, Representative Hollins, briefly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the conversation. I would recommend a yes vote. Thanks.
Thank you for the member discussion and for all the testifiers. Representative Hollins renews the motion to recommend that House File 3413, as amended, be placed on the general register. Roll call has been requested.
Chair Moeller.
Aye.
Chair Moeller, aye. Chair Novotny.
No.
Chair Novotny, no. Vice Chair Feist.
Aye.
Vice Chair Feist, aye. Vice Chair Whitty.
No.
Vice Chair Whitty, no. Representative Berg.
Aye.
Representative Berg, aye. Representative Bliss.
No.
Representative Bliss, no. Representative Curran.
Aye.
Representative Curran, aye. Representative Duran.
Nope.
Representative Duran, no. Representative Engen. Representative Greenman.
Aye.
Representative Greenman, aye. Representative Harder.
No.
Representative Harder, no. Representative Hollins.
Aye.
Representative Hollins, aye. Representative Hudson.
Nope.
Representative Hudson, no. Representative Johnson.
Aye.
Representative Pinto.
Aye.
Representative Pinto, aye. Representative Ream.
Ream, aye.
Representative Ream, aye. Representative Rapinski.
No.
Representative Rapinski, no. Representative Schwartz.
No.
Representative Schwartz, no. Representative Steer.
No.
Representative Steer, no. Representative Tabke.
Aye.
Representative Tabke, aye. There are 10 ayes and 9 nays.
There being 10 ayes and 9 nays, the motion does not prevail. Members, we did have two other